In this video, we are going to talk about this type of object called an array. So A-R-R-A-Y, array. So I have here a class called ArrayTester. It's got a main method, and then we are going to go ahead and write some code that uses arrays inside this method. So an array is a type of object that can contain multiple values. And then those values are numbered using what is referred to as an index value. To create an array, first, let's go ahead and specify a variable that's going to store the array. So I'm going to say int square brackets, and then I'm going to call this one nums. And then I will say equals new int, and then in the square brackets, I am going to put 5. And then a semicolon. So what does this mean? So this is the part that actually creates the array. This is a variable that is meant to store an array object. So the name of the variable is nums, and the data type is an array of integers. So this part, the square brackets, is what symbolizes that it's supposed to store an array. Now, in Java, when you create an array, you have to specify the data type of the values that that array should contain. So in this case, we're saying that we expect to create an array that is supposed to store integers. So this means that this array is going to be for integers and not for strings, for example. So that's what this does. And then this part actually creates the array. So an array is something that has a fixed size. So the new keyword here creates the new array. And then when you say int and then square brackets, you mean to say that you want to create an array. Now the number inside here is for the length of the array. So this means that we are creating an array that can store 5 values. So an array is fixed in terms of its length. So you can't change that after you make the array. You can change the values inside it, but this array will always contain 5 values. All right. So right now, because it's an array of integers, the values inside it will default to 0. So if you want to access a particular index in the array, you would say the name of the array. So we've got the variable name here, nums, and then you've got square brackets, and then 0 is going to access the first index in the array, and then 1 is going to access the second index in the array, and so on. So right now, all of the slots in this array will have a value of 0. So if we print this out, whether we print nums square brackets 1, nums square brackets 2, 3, all the way to 4, 0 all the way to 4, the value inside it is going to be 0. So let's go ahead and test this out. So let's compile it, and then once it's done, let's go ahead and run it. So our expected output here is 0. So we are printing the second item in the array by accessing num square brackets 1. So by default, it's 0. So right now, because we didn't assign any values, we just created the array, and then it gets default values in each of the index. So again, if it's an array of integers, defaults to 0. If you want to change that value, so let's say, for example, we want to change the value that's stored in index 1. So we say nums square brackets 1, and then we say equals 10, for example. So now we've changed the value for this specific index. So the rest are still 0. Let's go ahead and change the value for num square brackets 3. So let's make this one 15. So now nums 0 is 0, nums 1 is 10, nums 2 is still 0, nums 3 is 15, and nums 4 is 0. So we can use a loop to print out or to iterate through the array. So let's go ahead and use a for loop for this one. For int I is equal to 0. So let's start at 0 so that we can get the very first value as well. And then let's go through this. Let's iterate as long as I is less than the value of nums dot length, which is 5. Okay, so you can hard code a value here, or you can dynamically get the length of the array. So nums dot length gives us 5, and then we say I plus plus, so that we go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 and then to 4. So inside here, let's just go ahead and print out the value of nums, square brackets, and then let's put I in here, right? So in the first iteration, I is 0, so this is going to print out nums, square brackets, 0. Second iteration, I is now 1, so this is going to print out nums, the value of num, square brackets, 1. So our expected output here should be 0, 10, 0, 15, and 0. So let's go ahead and recompile. And then let's go ahead and test this out. So 0, 10, 0, 15, and 0. Index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, and index 4. All right. And then let's go ahead and print the numbers out in reverse. So we can go and start, instead of starting at 0, we want to start at index 4, right? Because we've got 5 items here. The highest index value is 4, which pertains to the last item in the array. But instead of typing in 4, we can say nums.length minus 1, right? So this gives you the highest index value in the array. And then as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, then you want to keep iterating, right? And then instead of going I plus plus, instead of saying I plus plus, we say I minus minus because we want to go backwards, right? So in this case, we are starting the value of I at nums.length minus 1, or 4, and then we are going backwards. So we're going to go from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0. So as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, let's go ahead and keep iterating through the array. And in this case, what we want to do here is, again, just print out the value inside the current index. So nums square brackets 4, nums square brackets 3, nums square brackets 2, and so on. So let's just go ahead and add more values here. So let's just change them. So nums 0, let's change this to 6. Nums square brackets 2, let's change this to 7. And nums square brackets 4, let's change this to 3. So our expected output here is 3, 15, 7, 10, and 6 because we're going backwards. All right. So let's go ahead and recompile this. And then let's go ahead and run it. So we do get the expected output, 3, 15, 7, 10, and 6. So going in reverse, 3, 15, 7, 10, and 6. Here's another way to create an array. So let's go ahead and make an array of strings this time. So let's say string, and then square brackets, right? Because it's going to be an array of strings. Let's call this one words, and then is equal to, and then let's go ahead and say new array of strings. Let's just give this one a size of 3. So this array can contain 3 values, will contain 3 values, has a length of 3. So let's go ahead and assign some values. Okay? So because this is an array of strings, if we don't assign any values, each index, each slot in the array is going to have a null value inside it. Okay? If it's a numeric value, like an integer, it's going to be 0. If it's a double, it's going to be 0.0. All right. So let's see, words 0 is equal to apple. So it has to be a string, right? Words square brackets 1 is equal to banana. Double quotes for strings in Java. And then words square brackets 2 is equal to, and let's say dog for this one. All right. So we can access the values using array access notation as well. So the name of the array, the variable name, and then square brackets and the index. So we can say system.out.println words square brackets 1. So this is going to print out banana. Now let's go ahead and loop through the array, but let's go ahead and use a different form of a for loop. Let's use an enhanced for loop. So I'm going to type for, and then I'm going to type string. Then I'm going to declare a variable is what I'm doing here. Word, and then a colon, and then words, and then curly braces. So what this means is we want to iterate through the array words, which is this one. Okay, so this is the reference to the array. What you put after the colon is the reference to the array. And then to the left of the colon, so to the right of the colon is the reference to the array. To the left of the colon, you declare a variable, which is going to serve as a temporary variable that's going to hold the item in the array in the current iteration. So you also specify the data type. So since this is an array of strings, then you have to make sure that you type string in here. So it's going to iterate through all of the strings in the array called words. And in each iteration, it's going to store that string in the current iteration in this variable called word. So you can decide what to name this. You can name it X, okay, you can name it Y, whatever, but let's be descriptive and just name it word. So what we're seeing here is for each string word in the array words, let's go ahead and do stuff with it. All right. So in this case, let's just go ahead and print it out. System.out.println, and then let's just say word. So we iterate through the words array. For each word in that array, let's go ahead and print out the value of word. So in the first iteration, apple, words square bracket 0, is going to get stored in word. And then in the second iteration, the second string, banana, is going to get stored in word, and then it's going to get printed out. And then in the final iteration, the string dog is going to get stored in the variable word, and then it's going to get printed out. So here, Java is just going to know to go through every single item in the array, and then it's just going to stop when there are no more items in the array. So we don't need to actually put in these we don't need to initialize a variable. We don't need to set a terminating condition. We don't need to put an updating expression in here. So with this enhanced for loop, you actually just go through every single item or element in the array. All right, let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. All right, so our expected output here would be apple, banana, and dog. We're just printing each item, each element one by one. So let's recompile. And then let's go ahead and run it. So we get apple, banana, and dog. All right. So an introduction to arrays in Java. So you create an array using the new keyword followed by the data type of the values that you want to store in the array, followed by square brackets, and then the length of the array. So this pertains to how many items you will be storing in that array. You cannot change this after creating the array. If you want a new array of words with more values or less values, then you have to create a new array. And then to declare a variable for an array, so you declare the variable name. So in this case, I'm declaring a variable named words. And then for the data type, so you put in square brackets, and then before that, you type in the variable or the data type of the values that you want to store in that array. So in this case, this is going to be a variable for an array of strings. So because this is an array of strings, this means that you have to store strings in there. You can't store integers, for example. So if I say words 0 is equal to the integer 1, then this is going to give me an error. All right. So, well, actually, so let's go ahead and try that. So, okay, words 0 is equal to 1. And then let's go ahead and compile this. And then let's go ahead and wait for it to compile. And then we get an error. Incompatible types. Int cannot be converted to string. So this is a string array, so you can't put an integer in there. And here we have another way of creating arrays. So this one creates an array and populates it with values at the same time. So we have an array of string values called words, and we are assigning to it an array that has 3 values. So in curly braces, we place the values separated by commas. So since this is a string array, then the values have to be strings. So this creates an array of strings that has a length of 3. In index 0, we have the string apple. In index 1, we have the string banana. And in index 2, we have the string that says dog. And then here in our for loop, we go ahead and iterate through the array and print each element one by one. So let's go ahead and compile this. And then let's run it. And here we see the expected output. So even though we are not specifying a length of 3, because we have 3 values in here, so the array is automatically going to have a fixed length of 3. So we won't be able to change that in the same way that we won't be able to change the length of these arrays that we created this way. So if you want to increase the length of the array, if you want to be able to put more values in there, then your option here would be to create a new array with a larger length and then just copy these values in that new array and then add the additional values that you'd like. All right, so that's it for this video. This is our lesson on an introduction to arrays in Java.